Welcome. My name is Kevin Offner. I work with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is one of the sponsors of tonight's lecture, along with the Center for Christian Study. This is the third of three lectures in the University Faculty Lecture Series. First, a word about our sponsors. InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. We began in 1940. We're on over 700 campuses around the United States. And we mainly want to help students to think, what does it mean to make Jesus Christ central in all that we do and say? So we encourage priorities, relationships, values, and especially studies. What does it mean to think Christianly as a Christian in your studies? So we really try to help our students and faculty to do that. The Center for Christian Studies, as many of you know, has been here since 1976, and it's located right across the grounds on Chancellor Street. They do a lot of good things. I thought the best way to explain them is just a sentence that they have from their website, which I thought was very helpful and very important. The Center for Christian Studies seeks to serve Jesus Christ by fostering the serious consideration in the university environment of a biblical worldview, and by encouraging and facilitating wise discussion of the truth in light of the challenge of contemporary culture. I think that says it well. So now a word about our speaker tonight. I guess it's this afternoon. It's John M. Owen IV, who I'm grateful to say is a personal friend of mine. I'll say a word about that in a minute. But first, a few things about John. John is the Taylor Professor of Politics with a focus on international politics here at UVA. He's also the Senior Fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. His expertise is in things like war, regime change, religion, international security, and democracies all around the world. What makes a democracy a democracy? Some of his books are Confronting Political Islam, The Clash of Ideas in World Politics, Liberal Peace, Liberal War, American Politics and International Security. John's also involved locally in the community here. He was asked not too long ago to be part of a panel that the president put together on what shall we do about free speech at UVA. Very interesting panel. I found helpful. And then he was quoted. He was centered as one of the professors of the week. And I thought this quote that he gave on kind of what his mission is and how he sees politics was helpful. He said, "The notion that politics is just about who has the most guns has never been satisfactory for me. It's also about whose words and whose ideas." Finally, just a word personally. I was the InterVarsity staff worker at Harvard University in the early 90s, and John was one of the doctoral students that was a part of our group. We had a group of about 40 students, and 6 or 7 of the doctoral students who were political science focused would meet together every other week. John helped start that group. They met every other week for about 4 or 5 years, and all through the summer as well, just talking about issues of faith and politics. How do we think about this as Christians? And one of my memories of John is that sometimes these grad students could get in pretty strong disagreements with each other, and sometimes they kind of center left, center right, and they would kind of fight with each other a little bit. And John was always the peacemaker. John would try to see both sides of any argument. When we were reading Kant or Kierkegaard, whoever we were reading, and people kind of gave him a bad slant, John would say, well, let's be fair. I think what Kant's really trying to say is this. Even if he disagreed with it, he wanted to be fair. And I think that's carried over in John's personal life and in his teaching as well, a sense of objectivity and fairness. So his topic tonight is, what's wrong with democracy? So John, please.
Thank you. Kevin, thanks for the kind words, and I do remember that. He's referring to the what we called the Monday Club back then. And I don't remember being a peacemaker at all, but I'm glad that I do remember lots of arguments. But anyway, I'm glad. Thanks for those memories. So tonight, thank you for coming. My topic is what's wrong with democracy? ? 3 answers, no consensus. To clarify at the outset, we have to do some throat clearing at the beginning. This question can be taken many ways, and that's deliberate. I want to thank Danielle Wilcox for helping me. I think this might have even been her title, but it's a brilliant one. I don't mean, what's wrong with democracy? Like, you got a problem with democracy? I'm going to defend it, though I could do that. I don't mean, there's something wrong with democracy It's not a good system. I don't mean that either. I mean, what is wrong with the democracy we have? What's ailing it? Because it's not doing well. So that's the sense in which I intend this talk. So let me open with these book covers. This is comparing the books on the left. I'm old enough, I dare say, I'm looking out. Some of you are old enough to remember these books on the left from the 1990s. End of History and the Last Man. This is back when we were at the Monday Club, Kevin. Francis Fukuyama's book about how liberal democracy has won the war of ideas that spanned millennia. And so there's no alternative to liberal democracy. Now we know that. The Cold War's ended. The Soviet Union's gone. And it's just going to be democracy for ever and ever. Below it, a similar book, Michael Mandelbaum's The Ideas That Conquer the World. Very optimistic about the future of democracy in the world. Well, that was a long time ago. Here on the right-hand side, we see some more recent books, bestsellers, How Fascism Works. I remember when I started teaching, I taught a course on political ideologies. I had trouble getting the students to engage with fascism. Who cares? It's buried in the ash heap of history. No longer, at least in the minds of some writers. And then How Democracies Die, another. So these are by very influential writers. So we've come a long way in 25, 30 years, not in a good sense, at least if the bestseller lists are any guide. So democracy then is in trouble, and it's in trouble here and elsewhere. So here, this is a montage on the right. These are Capitol Police on January 6, 2021. You know all about that. On the left is a photo of Xi Jinping, the president of China, who was recently elected to a third term, and term limits have been lifted, at least for now in China. He could serve a fourth term. He could be serving for quite a long time. These are 5-year terms. And China, of course, is not a liberal democracy, not a multi-party democracy. But there was, back in the days of Fukuyama and Mandelbaum, the smart money said China's on its way to becoming a democracy. Just wait, like Russia did, like Taiwan, South Korea, like the East European countries. It's just a matter of time, and nobody thinks that anymore. Instead, it has become a more authoritarian regime. So that's where we are. And I want to stress that the problem, I'm going to talk mostly about the United States today, but I want to stress that this is a global problem. I study international relations, so I think about this in global terms. So a couple of graphs, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I meant, well, does this have a pointer on it? It does. Bottom, top. I don't know how to aim it. Oh well, it doesn't matter. So the top graph is looking at world opinion in various countries of democracy as a thing. People are asked by the World Values Survey, what do you think of democracy? Is it a good system, a bad system? Do you want it for your country? And you can see since 1995 on the left to 2018 on the right, there's been a steady decline in opinion about democracy across countries. The dots are all over the place. You can see, so that's fitting a regression line to the dots. So there's a lot of variation, but nonetheless, the trend is quite clear. The bottom graph is tracing two things. It's the, according to a group in Stockholm, Sweden, who measured this very, very carefully, the number of democracies in the world and the percentage of people living in democracy from 1950 on the far left has climbed steadily. Just past halfway, you see a sharp climb in the blue curve especially. But in the last few years, starting about 2005, 2010, there's been a slight downturn. So democracy globally is no longer on the increase. It's actually on the decrease, the way these folks measure it. The blue curve is wealthy democracies, Europe, North America, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and so on. The bottom is the whole world. And both, especially the blue, is not going well. So that's where we are. But we're going to talk about America. We're going to talk about what's gone wrong, what's going on here. No matter your partisan affiliation, you probably have a sense that all is not well. So what has changed in the last 20 or 30 years to put us in this position in the United States? You hear a lot of answers about this from people like me, from professors, from politicians, from pundits, from journalists. And a very popular answer is, well, it's the political right. It's conservatives, the right wing, populism. These folks don't want democracy anymore. Maybe they did, but they don't anymore. You can see by the way they vote, the parties they empower across countries in this country, they are, have either recently become racist, white supremacist, or they always were and have kept that hidden and now it's come out. But that's the problem. The problem really lies on the right wing. It's a very commonly held view, I think particularly in academia. Then you have another answer, second one. It's a political left. Wokeism. The left is no longer liberal. They're censorious. They try to censor speech. They're always changing the words we're supposed to use, which seems like a power play. And so it's really, the problem's on the left. That's why democracy's in danger. There's a third answer, which says it's both. It's what we call polarization. Both right and left have actually have moved apart from each other, have become more extreme on some measures. This might be seen as an extension of the culture wars thesis that James Davison Hunter put out there in the 90s, back when we thought most people thought democracy was winning, had already won. So in this case, the two are polarizing or have polarized. They're feeding off of each other, right and left, reacting to each other, saying, look, they're crazy. Look, they're evil. Look, we can't trust them. Both saying that about each other. And that's the real problem with democracy. Because a democracy, most social scientists who study it say, relies on trust and compromise and some kind of conviction that the other side, even though you disagree with them, basically are okay. If they win this election, there'll be another election and you can contest that one. It'll be okay in the long run. But under polarization, that's not necessarily the case. Both sides think every election is life or death. It's maybe the last election we have because those guys are crazy because they're not Democrat. They don't believe in democracy anymore, right? I've got a fourth and a fifth up here. These are more about what's driving, whatever the problem is, what's driving it. And so sometimes you hear technology. That's really changed in the last 10 years. Some say the real guilty party, I'm trying to pull out right here, smartphone. Social media, which encourages us to get in these bubbles where we only pay attention to people who agree with us. And most of the conversations are about how outrageous the other side is. And again, so that's feeding polarization. And I've got number 5 up here is economic trends. That's another kind of answer where if you look at the distribution of income and wealth, it's become much more skewed. That's much more polarized than it used to be. So a lot of people have been left behind by what we call globalization, by the opening of national economies to trade and investment and immigration. And that's the real problem. And I could go on. Last night, I had more, but I'm going to stop at 5. You get the picture. There's one of our problems, we can't even agree what the problem is and what the causes are. So we can't really figure out a remedy or a set of remedies, right? I'm going to say I think there's a grain of truth in most of these. I'm going to focus on the middle one, polarization, because I think that's where we can get some traction. But I'll come back to that point in a minute. So a little bit of defining now. I say democracy, we use that as a shorthand. I'm going to pull the academic move and say, we really mean liberal democracy. I'm going to use that modifier, and you'll see why in a minute. By liberalism, I don't mean the everyday term that we use in American politics, the party of the left, the Democratic Party. If you're a Democrat, it's caring government. If you're a Republican, it's big government. That's not what I mean. That's encompassed in liberalism. I mean what political theorists mean by liberalism, which is a commitment to individual liberty as the highest political good. Commitment to individual liberty as the highest political good. This means that most, if not all, Americans are liberal in some sense. You got right liberals, you got left liberals. Everybody's liberal in this sense. There are other ways to think about American ideology. But I'm going to go with this one. It's kind of a rough and ready way to think about the regime under which we live. So what's liberal democracy then? Liberal democracy is a marriage of majority rule, democracy, power to the people, democracy literally from the Greek demos, the people, and kratos, power, and individual liberty. This brings together both of those things. They're not the same thing. We get to where we think they are the same thing. They're not the same thing. Some regimes in history have had majority rule but not individual liberty. Some have had, like ancient Athens, democracy, not liberal. Some have been liberal and not democratic. Britain before the early 20th century was pretty liberal but not very democratic. Liberal democracy brings these things together. You can't maximize both of these things. There's a built-in tension between liberty and democracy. It's kind of an optimization problem. And so tension is built in. Anyway, I could say more about that, but I want to move into the preserving liberal democracy and the dangers it's in. Why is it worth preserving, though? Let me just say a little bit about that, because I'm speaking as a Christian. Some Christians are actually saying, well, what is so great about liberal, especially the liberal part? Doesn't seem to be working very well. Not for us, not for me. So let me just say, I continue to think, I'm one of those people who thinks under modern conditions, it is the best regime for human thriving, human flourishing, for families, for the church even, under modern conditions. I'm not making a claim about, France in the 9th century, or China in 200 BC. I'm not claiming it's universally the best. It might be, but my claim is really under conditions of modern pluralism, technology, globalism, and so all these host of conditions we associate with modernity. It's the best regime, and I think it's worth defending, and I think when you look at alternatives on offer now, it's something the church really should continue to back, and so. But I'm not going to make that argument, just stipulating, speaking as a Christian and a member of the church. So what has changed then? I'm going to argue liberalism itself has changed. That's what's really changed, and we have changed it. It didn't change itself. That wouldn't make any sense. We have changed this thing we call liberalism. So what's liberalism? Let's say a little bit more about that. Liberalism, again, is a political philosophy that asserts that the highest political good is individual freedom or individual liberty. What does that mean? Liberty, let's just say the ability to live as one wants to live. Some of you will know this. Typically, we say this ideology has its origins hundreds of years ago, early modern Europe, with the Reformation, Counter-Reformation, the so-called, I think they're misnamed, but wars of religion they're often called, which ended in basically a kind of armistice where the princes of Europe agreed we will leave each other's religion alone. And there took hold soon, starting in the Netherlands, but in other places as well, this idea, well, the individual should be able to decide for him or herself religion. It's not a threat to a Catholic prince if he has Protestant subjects, necessarily. So let's start to let that go. And it gradually took hold. But it branched out from religion, which was the big one to start with, to other questions about individual consent and freedom. Still, all this is pretty abstract, individual liberty. What does it mean concretely? There have been a number of questions that have come up over the decades, over the centuries, but how do we fill in individual liberty? What does that mean? Who counts as an individual? That has expanded a lot over 250 years. How do individuals want to live? How do we figure out if people are actually able to live as they want? Because that changes over time too. What limits individuals' ability to live as they want? That changes over time as well. So all of these things have shifted over the centuries. This is vexing and perplexing, but it's also one of the secrets of liberalism. It's quite an adaptable ideology. It's able to adjust to the movements of history in a way that some ideologies are not. I think this is one reason why it's still around. It's a source of its longevity. What do I mean by that? Well, over 2.5 centuries or so, I'm arguing we've had 3 versions of liberalism, each enjoying a period of dominance. So in the left-hand column, I've got the 3. I'm going to unpack this in a second. The first is generally called classical liberalism from the late 18th century to the early 20th. It was supplanted in the early 20th century by welfare liberalism, and that had a shorter period of dominance, really till the mid-1970s, at which point what I'm calling open liberalism became dominant. And that's what we're living under now. So there's been a kind of not a steady shift, it's been periods of dominance by various versions of liberalism. And so we want to talk about the transitions. When classical gave way to welfare, what happened? What caused that? And I'm going to argue that in each of these transitions, there's been a crisis. The dominant liberalism didn't seem to be working very well. And so people began to ask, what's the chief threat to individual liberty now? Not what did Thomas Jefferson say back then. UVA, we always care about what Mr. Jefferson said is still normative. But, society in general often says, that was then, this is now, we're in a different world. What's the chief threat right now? What is the remedy now to that chief threat? How do we ensure the liberty of individuals in today's world? And that leads to what's the good life? What does it look like when people are free, when individuals are free? That also has changed over time. So a little bit about each of these types of liberalism. Version 1, classical liberalism. Said that, and on the left is Mr. Jefferson. On the right's a guy called Richard Cobden, Englishman, a couple of generations after Jefferson, and he was a classical liberal, to be sure, a manufacturer, believed in the free market and so on, very influential in transatlantic politics. Anyway, what these folks agreed on was that the chief threat to liberty is the despotic state, the state, which is by its very nature coercive. And so if you want to have individual liberty, you shrink the state. This is coming out of a period of absolute monarchy in the 17th and 18th centuries. The American colonies freeing themselves from British rule is part of that story, but it's much bigger than that. The American colonies they thought a big problem we have is there's a king over there and there's a parliament that is way exceeding its bounds, so we're going to have a smaller state over here. Free market economics, laissez-faire economics. So get the state out of the business of fostering monopolies. So we're not going to have a king, and we're not going to have the government decide, well, this company is the only one that can sell orange marmalade, or this is the, right? We're just not doing that. We're going to let the market take care of itself. And so the good life, there's a kind of a culture that emerged. A good life associated with classical liberalism was included things like personal freedom of enterprise, freedom of association, freedom of contract, freedom of movement. Go west, young man. If you want opportunity and you don't have it in your town, just go live somewhere else. It's kind of a cultural, and all of these versions of liberalism have a culture that goes with it. Here's a representative quote from Tom Paine, not a Christian, but a classical liberal, from his book, The Rights of Man. This is partly responding to what's going on in the French Revolution. In simple quote, common interest regulates men's concerns and forms their law, and the laws which common usage ordains have a greater influence than the laws of government. So what is he talking about? He's really saying that among people, and I'll use his word men, because men are the real agents at the time, adult men, there's a natural harmony of interests. It has to do with commerce, free exchange. If we can get government out of the way with its meddling fingers, with its coercion, and just let people do business, they'll be much happier and better off. Right? That's classical. That's a classical liberal statement. Government out of the way. Natural harmony of interests, right? Classical liberalism had a very good run not without some opposition, lots of problems in this country, the Civil War, near-death experience for the Union, right? But classical liberalism, a lot of historians think, actually played a role in abolishing slavery. It's a complicated story. We can talk about it if you want, but it really was dominant for a long time, really until the early 20th century. There were people who didn't like it, who really quite early in the 19th century, a few liberal thinkers said, you know, all this thing about small government getting out of the way, that's not right. There's something wrong with that. But these folks didn't really get much purchase until the early 20th century. And most of us call this welfare liberalism was a successor. Things came to a head in the Great Depression in the 1930s when you had 25% unemployment rate in this country and the same in most industrial democracies. Classical liberalism just didn't seem to have the equipment to deal with this. And it was serious because democracy was in a crisis. There was, on the left, you had a lot of Americans who thought, you know, communism, Stalin, I mean, maybe he's not a nice guy, but they've got full employment over there, we don't here. On the right, fascism, right? Nazi Germany has put all its men back, had 6 million unemployed men in 1930. They're all back to work by 34, 35, a lot of them in the military, because the Nazi state was building its military. But nonetheless, they were working. And so a lot of people in the West said, fascism looks like it's better equipped to, you know, democracy was great, but it's in the modern world, it doesn't work. So this was a huge problem for liberal democracy in the 1930s. And so these ideas had been floating around. And on the right, you know, Franklin Roosevelt, New Deal, he really enacted a lot of these welfare liberal tenets. But below him is an economist called John Maynard Keynes that kind of put an economic theory footing beneath what Roosevelt and other people were doing. But generally speaking, liberal intellectuals like Keynes, and there were many other, John Dewey, actually Theodore Roosevelt before Franklin thought him this way as well. The real threat to individual liberty is no longer the despotic state, because our state's not really despotic. It's gotten out of the way. But a lot of people aren't free. The real problem is unfettered capital, they thought. It's not the state anymore, it's capital, it's money. It's money trying to make more money. It's capitalism, capitalists and capitalism. Big business, big banks, they're the ones in the way of millions and millions of individuals. They're standing in the way between people and their freedom. What's the remedy? Well, the state has got to step in now. It's a liberal state. It's been tamed. It's okay. Don't worry. The 18th century is over. George III is long gone. We have a different state that we can now trust and harness to bring about individual liberty. And the real job, the immediate job, was full employment for adult males. With all those unemployed men, it's not just about the men, it's about their families. It's about their wives and children. Right? It's about their homes, it's about their communities. You got to put the men back to work. So this became their priority, because if the men aren't working, nobody's free. And democracy itself might crumble. So the good life, the culture associated with was stability, security, safety, stable families, stable communities, right? This kind of sets in with the New Deal, the Fair Deal, Harry Truman. Eisenhower, a Republican, did not erode the welfare state, right? This goes on for a few decades. And people begin to associate this with democracy, actually. It became so normal. Here's a representative quote from just before welfare liberalism became dominant, an English philosopher called Hobhouse, L.T. Hobhouse. The function of state coercion, he's admitting, the state is coercive, but it's okay, because the function of state coercion is to overcome individual coercion, and of course, coercion exercised by any association of individuals within the state. That's abstract language for banks, corporations, any institution that's coercive toward it. It's the state's job not to get out of the way anymore, but to intervene, to help the individual. See how there's a very different... Now, the welfare liberals say, and I think they mean it, they're after individual liberty too, just like the classical liberals. But the world has changed, and the state has to be different now, and we need to rethink individual liberty and how it is to be secured. And we need to rethink what a liberal society looks like and so on. All right, that carried on for a few decades. Welfare liberalism also ran into some trouble in, especially the 1970s. It couldn't handle what's called stagflation, this regrettable, miserable combination of high inflation and high unemployment. Also, there was this cultural upheaval that came out of the 1960s. So the culture of welfare liberalism. I mean, look at I still have my parents' high school yearbooks from the 50s. And, open one of these things. Everyone looks the same, at least to me, to my untrained, I was raised in the 70s. They all look the same. It's very conformist. That's the culture of welfare liberalism, stability, security. Yearbooks, when I came along, guys had ridiculous hair and, leisure suits and so on. So that's something had changed, right? The culture had changed, but also you have this different kind of liberalism that's starting to take hold. Now, the chief threat to liberty is seen as traditional norms, institutions, and boundaries, metaphorical boundaries, really. And the remedy is open everything up, what we call globalization. Open up the economy, and let's have what some historians call the rights revolution, where we're actually recognizing or extending all kinds of rights that our ancestors wouldn't have thought of necessarily or would have thought, or maybe not a great idea. And the good life now becomes one of, you see phrases like self-creation, self-actualization. Some sociologists, Robert Bellah and others, call it expressive individualism. Fluidity is another notion. It's quite different from the culture of welfare liberalism, which is about security, stability, a kind of conformity. This purports to be the opposite, right? I put on the right two Anglo-American pairs. This may surprise you, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher. Really? Yeah, because they really are responsible for the economic side of this. Below them are Bill Clinton and Tony Blair. Also relatively free market people, not as much as Reagan and Thatcher, but they also brought in the, let's call them the 60s values of personal liberation and expressive individualism. This is called the third way back in the 90s. So it's a real synthesis of things. Sometimes the Reagan-Thatcher bit is called neoliberalism, if you like that term, and the Clinton-Blair part is called social liberalism. Anyway, it's a synthesis. So I've got three quotes here to kind of get at the logic of open liberalism. First is from a philosopher, Charles Taylor, Canadian philosopher. Says our understanding of life, and he's sort of speaking for Western society in general in our own era, is that each one of us has his or her own way of realizing our humanity, and that it is important to find and live out one's own, as against surrendering to conformity with the model imposed on us from outside by society, or by the previous generation, or a religious or political authority. He really is summing up the ethos of our time, and gone back a few years. He wrote this in 2007. For the economic side, I looked at Alan Greenspan, who, when he said this, had just stepped down from as chairman of the Federal Reserve. He says, it hardly makes any difference who will be the next president. The world is governed by market forces. It's an open world economy, opening world economy. And then an intellectual called Mark Lilla, a few years before, had written this provocative article, New York Review of Books, and he says the cultural revolution out of the 60s, the Reagan Revolution, those two have proved to be complementary, not contradictory events. In other words, Reagan, Republican, conservative governor of California, conservative president, you think he has nothing to do with the hippie culture, and vice versa. And Lilla's saying, and he makes the case quite nicely, no, they came from different places. They didn't think of themselves as allied, but they have been fused in this synthesis. And that's the kind of liberalism we're living under now. So I sound critical. I do want to say each of these liberalisms had achievements. And open liberalism in particular, I think helped win the Cold War. It helped vanquish the Soviet Union. The Cold War was stalemated until open liberalism was tried. That was one reason why it was tried. The West was stagnant and stuck. And open liberalism did ramp up economic growth under Reagan, under Thatcher, under other European leaders. At the same time, there has been a lot of economic disruption, especially recently. So 2 graphs here. On the left is from The Economist magazine. The red curve is tracking manufacturing employment as a percentage of the U.S. population. Between 1990 and 2016, it went from 12% to 6%, so cut in half. So America lost half of its manufacturing jobs in those years. The bars show imports of goods from China during the same years. You can see the two are going in different directions. The economist, MIT economist David Autor has done econometric work saying that in the first decade of this century, 2000-2010, the U.S. lost 2.4 million manufacturing jobs just to China alone, and you could add to that Mexico and other, right? So openness has been disruptive to lots of American families and communities. On the right, this is a really, how am I doing on time? Not great. Okay, so this is a really interesting graph. Branko Milanovic, another economist, this is called the elephant graph for obvious reasons. So this is complicated. It's got a lot of data in this graph, and it's tracking from the year 1988 to the year 2008, the distribution of income across the world. It's trying to show you how various people, poor, middle class, and rich, around the world have done under globalization since 1988. And you see it's a complicated story. It's peak there. Those are heavily people in China and also India. Those are huge countries. They've done really well under globalization, and that's something to celebrate. That's a good thing. Don't misunderstand me. That's a very good thing. C, very small group, but they've also done really well. Those are the really rich people in the West and also outside the West. They've done super well. But in between is B, which is down at the bottom, zero progress. Who are those people? That's the middle class and working class in North America and Europe and Japan. So that's the elephant graph. And this is, making a lot of moves here, but that can be attributed in part to the impetus of open liberalism to open everything up. Lots of people, the world has gained in wealth, to be sure. Hundreds of millions of people in what we used to call third world have been lifted out of poverty. But a lot of people have not moved at all. And they look around and they say, wait, time out. I thought my kids were going to have a better life than I, but my kid's on fentanyl. What's going on here? So, political results. Again, Cold War victory, yay, open liberalism, but polarization, partly because of economics, partly because of culture. So this is on the left a study that Hunter and Carl Bowman and others did of the state year 2020, and it's just kind of illustrating polarization. The blue and red America see very different threats, very different problems with the country. They don't match up very well at all. So blue America, liberal left-wing America, racism, inequality, poverty, climate change, those are the big problems facing us. Right wing, no, it's media, fake news, China, and crime, right? You might think, well, that's always the case, right? That's why we have two parties. No, look on the right, it's gotten worse. That's tracking across a number of issues, the differences between two parties. 1994 to 2004, pretty similar. By 2017, look how far apart the parties are, right? That's what we're talking about when we say polarization. And the two sides, again, look at each other with bafflement and even contempt and mistrust. Again, that's where we are. So my last point is about what do we do about this? And here I'm going to get tentative, but I want to make the start of a proposal that we think about. Because liberalism has changed before, it can change again. But how should it change? How should we think about personal liberty? If we still value individual liberty, as I do, I hope you do as well, but we recognize the world has changed out from under us, or changed partly because of us, because of what we've been doing in it. Maybe we need to rethink some things the way our ancestors did when they changed liberalism. So the chief threat to liberty, following this formula, what is it? Well, I submit one way to think about it is the fluidity, what is really paradoxically an imposed perpetual choice across all areas of life. And perpetual means for your whole life, from womb to tomb, you're having to make choices that your grandparents or great-grandparents wouldn't have had to make. That may sound good, like what's wrong? That sounds great if we believe in liberty. But what if you want to stop choosing? What if you just want to have that job and live in that community and stay there? Isn't that a choice you should be allowed? Well, you can do it, but you're going to lose. You're making a lot of sacrifices. Law and policy seem to conspire against that kind of thing. It leaves a lot of people behind. And even the winners, even people who do this, aren't always very happy about it, right? Lonely, anxious, on medication, always afraid of being out of a job or having to move. Right, families are a lot weaker, even wealthy, even well-off families. To say, don't get me started on poor families. Remedy, again, this is very big picture. This is flying at 10,000 feet, but a liberalism that does not favor fluidity over commitment. How does that cash out? What would that look like? Well, maybe it is time to rein in globalization a bit, this is already happening, in fact, in policy to some extent. There's some economists, so the picture of the guy on top, that's Charles Taylor, the Canadian philosopher I referred to a minute ago. He's written about liberalism in our time. Bottom is a guy I don't know very well, but I just picked. He's an interesting conservative thinker who's thinking about markets in a different way. He's called Orrin Cass, and just an example of how people on the right are thinking about economics in ways they haven't in a long time. People on the left, there might be some convergence there. More respect for traditional institutions, communities, and so on. And this, including newcomers, immigrants, right? They have their traditional ways as well. When they move to a country like the US and the UK, they feel this pressure to become fluid as well. What if we came up with a liberalism that didn't put that pressure on them or on communities of people who've lived in the country for generation after generation? I mean, is this possible? Is this something to think about? And so the good life then under this liberalism, which I'm calling pluralistic liberalism, pluralistic meaning it really doesn't require you to be a certain type of person, the fluid, the commitment-free, the free agent, the atomized individual. It actually would allow you to commit to a community, to a family, to a place of work. That would be a good life is a society that lets people do that without penalizing them. Without saying, you can do that, but you're not going to have a job, or your kids aren't going to go to college, or, your family's going to fade away if you do that. So it's your choice. Instead, a society that actually values these commitments. This is, so I don't have concrete policy proposals. I'm just want us to think about what individual liberty really, do we have it really now? And if not, is that why why democracy is so wobbly right now? So again, if we want to preserve liberal democracy in America, to me it's very clear we need to try to depolarize. Easier said than done, but things are really pretty awful regarding trust in American society, and again, across most other democracies as well. This doesn't mean trying to return to the past. You might be nostalgic for welfare liberalism. A lot of people are, a lot of my colleagues. Just remember, there's a reason why we moved on. It wasn't working in the 70s. It really wasn't. You might be nostalgic, as I can be sometimes, for classical liberalism. But there's a reason why we left that behind as well. So this is not a call for renewing an old liberalism. We might learn some things, might cobble together pieces from some of those old liberalism. Fine. But this is not a nostalgia. It can't be a nostalgic project. Instead, it's really designed to meet the challenges of our century, which are new. They bear a family resemblance to some old challenges, but there's some new challenges. It's crucial to uphold individual freedom, but to rethink it and to be willing to compromise, something that is in very short supply right now. This may sound like too tall an order. This is too hard. We can't do it. Maybe we should just split the country. Maybe we should have what one politician called a national divorce. Wouldn't that make it easier? Well, before we go that way, let's just remember, America has actually done this before. We've been in these situations before. I did not mean to imply this is the first time. It's on the left, very familiar site during the 1930s, great unemployment line in the Great Depression. Middle, that's Detroit riot in 1967. On the right, this is a more familiar Minneapolis, shortly after the George Floyd killing. The United States has faced these crises before and has risen to the challenge, and I don't see any reason a priori to say we can't do it again. We just have to realize the situation we're in, and that the problems run very deep indeed. It's not just a tweak here or there. It requires a fundamental reform. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention. Happy to take any questions.